Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar. We are really excited to have the special guest that we have with us today from Accenture and JLL to discuss understanding ESG reporting for the building and construction industry. Just before we get started, to let everybody know, this webinar is being recorded and you will get a recording. You can also request the deck later. Right from the very start, you can start putting your questions into the questions panel. Both presenters will have relatively shortish presentations to go through, and then we're going to spend the lion's share of the time doing Q&A. Exciting news, we've just recently done a soft launch of a new version of the Transparency Catalog, where you'll find every EPD and material ingredient disclosure for products in North America, all organized by master format. So really the height of transparency, and I'm going to do a very quick demo to let you know what's new. You can go start using it if you don't already. But without further ado, I'm going to move forward and set the stage for our discussion. So I actually don't know a lot about ESG reporting. I've seen a lot written about it. I've read a lot about it. We do carbon accounting, so I know that part of it. But with all of the news articles, contention around investment, so many frameworks and reporting tools, I thought now was a good time to really kind of dig into ESG reporting, because it's a transparency effort and we are in the transparency business. And so I decided if I wanted to learn more about ESG reporting, I'd like to learn about it from people I know and trust, which is why we're so excited to be able to have Dhruv and Sean with us today. And both have really interesting perspectives and really high value content to share. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Dhruv. And again, you can start putting any questions you have into the questions panel. We'll take the questions when both presenters are done. And so they can be any questions you've come with or questions in response to what you've heard. So Dhruv, go ahead, take it away.
Thank you, Terry. You can hear me?
Yes.
So good afternoon, everyone, and maybe good morning for some of you. But it's a shame that my camera wouldn't turn on, or the GoToMeeting has some issues. But I was dressed in my finest. Let me assure you of that. So it's a shame that I can't be on the camera. But in any case, you can hear me, and that's what matters, right? Or also matters, I should say. So Dhruv Raina, some of you know me, some of you don't, but I was with Owens Corning and then Tarkett for the last 8 years, so in the industry. And so I know quite a bit about the industry and its journey, which is a tremendous one. But then I decided to change focus, right? We all set, as corporates, we all set 10, 20, 30-year goals. And I don't know if I'm going to be around, right, to see those goals mature, to realize or reach their full potential, right? Net zero 2050. I'm not going to be around working by then. So from that perspective, the curiosity in my brain, took me to what can I do that shows results faster. And if we don't win, then at least we learn lessons and then move forward. So Accenture provided that opportunity, where I'm part of the ESG measurement, analytics, and performance practice, to be specific. And the kind of questions I get on a daily basis from our clients are all very diverse in nature, but all have the same thing, or same thread, I should say, which is, how can I accelerate my transition faster? How can I measure if I'm on the right path on the journey, which I am? And how do I measure success and outcome, right? Which is very fascinating, right? We are talking about really condensing our time frame from decades to a matter of months, maybe 2 to 3 years max, of seeing what's working, what's not, and what levers do we need to pull to get to net zero or whatever that end goal might be. So very exciting times indeed. And Accenture, I'm sure you know, but it's a 700,000 people organization, global organization that's on the forefront of not just strategy from a sustainability perspective, but more importantly, implementation, right? I've been a strategy consultant, and I know that you give strategy, good advice, and then you walk away. But at Accenture, we actually go into the trenches with our clients to make sure that the strategy comes alive, right, from an implementation perspective, and just the amount of tools and technology we have access to and the talent makes it happen. So it's really the magic, and that makes it really exciting place to be at. So let's focus on ESG 101. ESG is really environmental, social, and governance factors from a perspective of the investor community, right? All of us have been practicing sustainability for the longest amount of time, but there are different languages that sustainability speaks, from our corporate sustainability report or anything that we do to communicate progress. So the investor community, came around a couple of decades ago and started asking, how can we standardize this information to ensure that the risks posed by a business that are material to them are being highlighted, but at the same time, the opportunities also are highlighted so we can take advantage of that. And we, as an investor community, want to invest in those businesses that are managing their risks and really taking advantage of their opportunities, right? So in simple terms, ESG investing is the investor perspective of taking into account the environmental, social, and governance factors alongside the financial factors in investment decision-making process. So hopefully that sets the stage. And Accenture did this study with the United Nations this year. And what we found out is at the C-suite level, at the CEO level, there is wholehearted agreement in terms of how CEOs and their businesses should be focused on driving sustainability. So there's no disagreement there. But there are also some pain points that were highlighted, and most of them were around data and technology, right? A lot of the CEOs we spoke to struggle to understand which technologies will take them to the next 20, 30 years of transition. They also had trouble with just measuring, right? What do I measure? How do I measure when there are no standards? So how can data and technology create or remove that barrier for my business to be able to consistent year upon year? And CEOs, that we engaged also were working on cross-sectoral initiatives, just like our building product manufacturers, of reducing their carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. And so how do they make sure that the efforts they are putting in, the dollars that they're spending in reduction, are being accounted for in the right manner, right? Nobody wants to be double counting or greenwashing anything that they do. So essentially, this is all about having that transparency. What you can't measure, you can't really make progress on. So it's the same mindset of what's not transparent, really, really transparent, you are greenwashing. Let's put it that way. And why is this so complicated? So if you look at the ESG landscape, it's still being defined, right? Just from an environment perspective, there are so many KPIs that businesses measure, and carbon is just one amongst many, right? So what is material to your business could be 5 KPIs or could be 50 KPIs. Similarly, on the social side of things as well, right? There's a lot of things that are very close to our heart, and some things that are very, very material to the business. And then there are other things that might be important to other businesses that may not be a big risk for us. And Similarly, on the governance side as well, how can we ensure that we are measuring the right KPIs, that we are enabling that transformation to a regenerative business? And to that point, the question we ask of our clients all the time is, where on this map do you think you land, right? On the extreme left, you have a very risk or compliance mindset of, I just want to manage my risk and go about, reporting them or whatever I need to, and that's good enough. And then as you start going to your right, you see there are aspirational brands, there are fast followers, industry leaders, and really regenerative brands that are out there, drawing a line in the sand for others to follow, right? So this puts into perspective where each business is and where they want to go, more importantly, so that we can define that path for them. However, once you set that, end goal of that's where I want to be as a business, you come to the reality of, what kind of data do I have to track progress, right? What kind of tools and technologies are available to me? And what are the end use cases that I'm trying to drive, right? This is not just about reporting. That was 10 years ago. This is more about having actionable insights of driving business performance, right? So we help our clients on this journey of where you are and what the state of the art looks like and what would it take for us to get there, right? That's important. And believe me, the future state vision that you see is very much possible. There are enough tools in the quiver today for us to really measure anything that we want to and also track progress. Let me give you an example. All of us are aware of the role EPDs play, right? And also LCAs that we have to do for our products. And all of us also know the painful experience of just getting one LCA done, right? 6 to 7 months, $15,000 to $30,000, and a lot of time of our staff to get just one product family done. Now imagine if you're a manufacturer and you have 10,000 products, right? You can do the math in terms of what it's going to cost you and how much time it's going to take. The answer is forever. You just can't get all your products, get an LCA done on all your products in this lifetime, unless you have 3 products or 4 products. So an example here is that there are tools and platforms and technologies today that help us go faster. And what I mean by that is what used to be one product in 6 months, we can do thousands of products in 6 to 12 months at a rapid pace and then scale them up too, right? So I'm talking about product carbon footprint specifically. So right away you see, right, you can't have an excuse in terms of, yeah, I have the intention and I have a goal and we'll get there, but it's going to take me 25 years just to get all my LCAs in place. That's not an excuse anymore. And you can pick up any KPI. The point I'm trying to make is that there's technology there today that helps us move faster and be more actionable and be more transparent with our stakeholders. And really what we are trying to do here is, I talked about the investor pressure, which has led us to the current state, which is ESG 1.0, as we like to call it. But what we're trying to do with this transformative journey is really trying to embed ESG at the heart of business strategy, right? Not driven by regulatory pressure alone, but really creating business resiliency. And that's where we think in the next 1 to 3 years, we will see the evolution to ESG 2.0, which is, it's sustainability embedded into every business for them to be able to track each and every KPI, for them to be able to track outcomes and how they are doing on their net zero or any other goals that they may have set for themselves. Globally, also, we are seeing this huge shift, right? All these standards are now coming together under ISSB and GSSB. So what used to be a landscape, a wild, wild west of all the different standards and reporting bodies is going to be very streamlined and very focused. So that helps businesses. And on the right-hand side, a regulatory pressure, right? SEC is going to ask businesses. This is not a final rule right now, but most likely later this year, it will become final, where businesses will have to report their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions starting in 2024. So this is very real, right? And I think it's a great opportunity for the leaders in this space because there's no place to hide. Let's put it that way. There's no more greenwashing. Just like you can't fudge your numbers in your 10K statement of your revenues, you can't fudge or greenwash your way out of what are your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. But more importantly, what are the risks of those emissions and how are you mitigating those risks, right? So the time is right for such a disruption coming from SEC themselves. And if you look beyond, just reporting and risk mitigation, it's all about, creating a resilient business. As a business, you might be anywhere along this journey, or you might be trying to create an economic case for circularity. You might be trying to get the data and measurement going, right? So huge companies, they still report, but have fragmented systems that don't communicate to one another. As a result, you don't have the most accurate information being reported out. How do you measure sustainable performance, right? You're creating innovations, but are they actually decreasing your carbon footprint, and are they improving sales, right? Accounting for climate, how do you do that? Using ESG technology systems. So like I gave an example of PCF previously of how to accelerate some of the transition. You can pretty much pick any hammer or a lot of hammers for the nail that you're trying to get into the wood. And climate risk, right? We haven't talked about it, but leading businesses are not just looking at scope 1, 2, 3 or measuring their KPIs, but are looking at the risk climate forces on their business, right? Are they going to lose business? Are they going to lose customers? Are they going to gain customers? What are the levers they need to pull? So this is like the next gen of, where my business would be. I have to consider these risks into the equation. And data and digital are at the heart of the ESG. So I've been talking about this for quite a while now, but we did another study at Davos this year. And what we found out is that majority of the companies do not have clear, reliable data to measure and monitor their sustainability goals. An equal amount of companies still use manual Excel-based semi-automated processes. And a lot of leaders that we talk to also cite inadequate skills, right? So we need to upskill our teams for sure. And majority of the companies we spoke to do not have embedded ESG data and measurement into their core systems. So it's still run by a sustainability organization or a risk organization, but it's not embedded within every function of the business, right? And most of us know that. So really, our goal is to help businesses achieve their vision, right, and monetize the opportunity. It starts with recording and reporting on your progress, but really what you want to do is you want to reduce your risks, improve on the opportunities you pursue, right? Whether it's decarbonized product portfolio or decarbonized value chain, how do you make money out of that? You need to rebalance some of that, the KPIs, but you need to have transparency to all of that. And that's what analytics helps you get there. And last but not the least, you have to monetize all of this, right? You're investing your time and resources. How can you make, or your business can make money out of all of these innovations? And a few more use cases that I would like to highlight. I already talked about live product carbon footprint or LCA by SKU. So you can have thousands of SKUs, and we can do that in a matter of months. you can use this kind of analytics for a product design, impact modeling, right? We all know that we should reduce the use of fossil-based raw materials. And what does that mean if we switch it with a bio-based raw material, right? So your teams have instantaneous view of what that means, so they can make decisions. You can do your supplier impact evaluations at a faster pace. And last but not the least, you can report on your ESG and performance at a rapid pace as well. So you're not spending months figuring out that data and getting it into a reporting format, but literally at the click of a button, you get all the relevant KPIs that you need to be assurance ready, right? As at Accenture, we don't do assurance like greenhouse gas assurance. We don't have auditors on staff, but we do take our clients to an assurance ready state where they can go and get the data assured by a third party. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of how you can accelerate some of the ESG goals that you have in your business. I want to leave you with a couple of actually 3 questions. How do you know that your business is accelerating at the right pace, with your commitment and goals? Like, how do you have visibility to that? So it's a question we all need to think about. How can we all effectively identify, collect, and monetize and drive performance with ESG data, right? It's one thing to report it in a TCFD report or an ESG report for a company, but how do you make actionable business decisions that drive business performance? And how do we, last but not the least, how do we optimize our data to be decision useful and proactive, right? The time of being reactive is over, and we need to be proactive. So all of us know that. I know this industry really well in terms of how all of you are leaders in this space. But how do you know that you're on the right journey, right? So that is a question we all need to ask ourselves. And with that, I think I'm at the end of my presentation. So thank you for your time. We'll take some questions later, but right now I want you to hear my friend Sean at JLL. Sean, take it away.
Thanks, Dhruv. So Terry, maybe, or somebody give me a thumbs up that audio is good.
Sounds great.
Cool.
And thank you, Dhruv.
Yeah. I'm really happy to be here. Sean Hesse, I am the Vice President of ESG Strategy at JLL. And my career trajectory, I'm a licensed architect. I started my career practicing architecture for 15 years and was designing high performance building and doing sustainability consulting, and worked for individual kind of the individual building scale up to university campus scale and neighborhood scale planning. I just prior to joining JLL for the last 5 years, prior to this, I was working at the International Living Future Institute. So that's the nonprofit most are familiar with, but nonprofit that leads programs Living Building Challenge, Living Product Challenge, Declare, Zero Carbon certification, et cetera. And my role there, I was helping to lead the special projects group where we were focused on working with enterprise scale organizations to deploy the ILFI certifications across their portfolio. And that's really where my role now at JLL is focused exclusively in that realm of working with organizations at that portfolio scale to think about how they develop and deploy ESG and sustainability strategies across their real estate footprint, whether they're corporations that are leasing space or whether they're developers that are building space, or universities, government agencies, nonprofits, et cetera. We've got clients that kind of span that whole range of users. So that's kind of my trajectory. And similarly, Dhruv, I think for me, my shift has been in scale because of feeling an urgency for impact, and going from the scale of a single project or a single building to the scale of an entire portfolio, and really thinking about ways to move the needle as quickly as possible. So let's see if my slides will forward. So just a quick overview about JLL. We're a global real estate advisory company. We've got almost 100,000 employees all around the world. We provide facility management services. We provide advisory services around leasing and brokerage. We help line up capital to actually create developments. We advise on the design end, on the strategy end, on the operations end. There's a whole team focused on workplace dynamics, which is looking at, looks at things like how you make your office commute worthy in a hybrid workplace now. And so, collectively there's billions of square feet around the world that we are either directly managing or advising on and supporting. And it's across that entire value chain, everything from the very beginning of a concept of trying to develop a new building to building the building, managing the building process and the design process as project managers, all the way through and advising in the design, development, construction, operation, and on down the line. And from a sustainability standpoint, the organization's been really focused on doing a lot of sustainability work for a long time. I mean, the one piece there, the last sentence of science-based targets, really fits into this conversation around ESG and ESG data. So JLL was one of the first organizations to sign up to the Science-Based Targets Initiative. We have folks that sit on the advisory committee that are helping to develop the science-based targets guidance specific to the building sector. And just one example of how, in the context of today's webinar, right? How are organizations using ESG data to inform what they're doing? This is an example of how JLL is using this data to inform our strategy and inform what we're doing. So you can see this is our 2018 carbon footprint, our greenhouse gas footprint, and you see our science-based target at the top there, reducing absolute emissions across all three scopes, 1, 2, and 3, 51% by 2030 and 95% by 2040. And the thing that's really important and obvious on this slide is 97, close to 97% of the emissions that that are in our footprint come from space that we manage on behalf of clients or that are essentially client emissions. And so for us as an organization, it becomes an imperative for us to be able to drive down the emissions of our clients and help them on that journey so that we can fulfill on our own ESG targets. So that fits in perfectly with the strategy of the organization, why I'm here, why this function exists within the organization. I sit within an organization that is focused on sustainability and ESG consulting across the real estate value chain. We have over 80 sustainability consultants around the country in the U.S. alone, and then there's 300 plus sustainability folks around the world. From a process perspective, from a service offering perspective, we provide sustainability and ESG strategy consulting. So this could look like helping an organization that is predominantly a real estate or driven organization to evaluate and set ESG targets and strategies. Or it could look like working with a corporate organization, a manufacturer or tech company, to translate their corporate ESG targets and goals into a strategy around their real estate. So really focused on this kind of intersection between the corporate ESG strategy goals and their real estate footprints. We provide a lot of EV strategy and implementation work, and this is one of those places where JLL's scope comes in to play, so we can help advise and evaluate, EV capacity, what's necessary, help plan for it, help develop the infrastructure for it, and then we've all the way to having teams and partners who can actually deploy and install those chargers across a real estate footprint. We can provide consulting and energy and carbon modeling and throughout the design process at a building or portfolio scale. We have teams that help with renewable procurement, whether it's on-site or off-site. We manage a lot of certifications, ratings, reportings to GRESB and other platforms. And then we can support on the kind of existing building side of operations, commissioning, and optimization. So really trying to optimize and find the places along that entire real estate value chain where the sustainability team can help to drive out emissions. So for us, when we think about the kind of, Drew presented the octopus diagram of, all the different ways that ESG data and targets and metrics can touch on different domains. When we think about translating that into a real estate context, we talk about it in these actual 4 buckets. We talk about ESG and R for resilience. But really, when we're talking about environmental indicators, it's the performance indicators that a lot of kind of the sustainability metrics are built around: carbon, energy, water, material, waste, etc. On a social pillar, it's looking at things like diversity and inclusion, but also human rights, health and safety, community and social impacts, ethical and inclusive procurement programs. From a governance perspective, it's really thinking about the transparency of the data, accountability, as Drew was talking about as well, anti-corruption, ethics and integrity, stakeholder engagement. And then on the resilience side, it's focused on, we look at climate risk assessment, both, physical, but also transition risks, which we'll talk a little bit about here. And helping to develop risk management strategies, whether it's resilience upgrades or continuity planning or even evaluating energy reliability and water quality issues. So there's these indicators that start to translate from the top level and the kind of broader ESG frameworks into the physical real estate sector. And really the question of why, what's driving this for the real estate sector is really these kind of 4 pressures. There's pressure for risk mitigation, whether it is internal or not, but there's pending physical risks due to climate change, sea level rise, increased storms, increased heat waves, ice storms, etc. And that has an obvious effect on a physical footprint. There's transition risk, which is thinking about kind of the regulatory environment, the economic incentives that exist, reputational impacts that come from being seen as a laggard in an industry, and even things like asset obsolescence. So in portions of the world, or even in the United States, where we have building performance requirements that are now baked into local jurisdictions, codes, etc., buildings that do not perform to that level can become stranded assets, essentially. Buildings that require an upgrade before anybody is allowed to, you can sell it, or before you can get a new certificate of occupancy, etc. There's financial implications for all of this. There's pressure from insurance and kind of the incentives and penalties side, which feeds into some of the risks. But there's opportunities for preferential financing. There's green bond opportunities. There's ways to tie ESG performance to financial performance, and there's ways to fund physical infrastructure work through these ESG frameworks to be able to pair this idea of ESG from an investor's perspective down to the implementation side through green bonds and other mechanisms. There's stakeholder pressure, right, coming from everybody from inside the organizations and their employees all the way out to investors, lenders, on the kind of external stakeholders. And then we've talked a lot about the regulation, and it's happening. We're really seeing characterize ESG regulation kind of across those scales, from local all the way up to international level and federal level regulations. So when we kind of characterizing this in terms of how our clients are using ESG data and how ESG data is kind of interacting with all of these different scales. You know, we see it kind of happening at the individual building scale, kind of across the bottom of this slide, at the portfolio scale in the middle, and then all the way at the organizational level as well, at that top level. And then across the verticals, you can see, you know, the two left columns really talk about how the organization manages or uses this data kind of from an inbound perspective of what the different protocols and different frameworks and certification platforms provide in terms of how they guide their work internally, how they set goals, how they manage risk, how they develop strategy, how they perform stakeholder engagement, how they collect data, how they prioritize, et cetera, right? And so it's kind of flowing from that middle column inbound to the organization and helping them, you know, guide their strategy and guide their work internally. And then it reflects back out, right? They use those same platforms to then communicate outbound messaging about their progress, about their status, about how they've achieved metrics or what goals they've set. And again, at those different scales. And then there are external parties that are represented in that far right column, and they're evaluating these organizations using these frameworks, looking at these same data points, these same reports, these same frameworks, to then evaluate the organization, whether it's kind of an investor evaluation, doing risk assessment, you know, regulations that are, you know, code compliance, reputational from external stakeholders, and on down the line, right? Even down to the idea of, you know, am I going to lend you money to build this building? Am I going to contribute financing to this project? To be able to look at use these ESG frameworks to help inform that evaluation process. So it flows kind of across the board in both directions. And just some examples, some project examples of projects that we're working on right now. So we've the vast majority of them, we can't disclose who they are, but you know, right now on our plate, we've got a major North American nonprofit. They have operations in every state, plus the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. We're supporting them in developing their first greenhouse gas inventory and really developing a real estate strategy that looks at green leasing strategies and helping them to really even set some of their first environmental goals relative to their organization. We've got another client that's a global government services contractor. They have over 1 million square feet of leased space around the United States. And they're subject to one of the most recent changing regulatory landscapes. There's an announcement that came out of COP just last week from federal procurement guidelines that say any federal contractor that receives above $50 million in contracts has to report Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3, and develop a science-based target. And so we're consulting with that organization to help them map how they would respond to that, develop a strategy to respond to it, and making sure that they're able to actually pull that together. We're working with a global financial institution. They're planning to build hundreds of branch locations around the United States. We're actually using ILFI Zero Carbon to frame that program and to think about how they validate the implementation of those branch locations, and making sure that those branch locations fit in with their corporate ESG targets and carbon reduction goals. We've got a data center developer, owner, and operator. They've got 40 data centers globally. They're providing data center space to all of the major tech companies, and so we're really helping them demonstrate their carbon reduction. But they've also been a bit haphazard in terms of their green building strategy. So that data center has an Energy Star score, and that data center is going after LEED, and that data center has Green Globes, and they've been very reactive. Just based on local market conditions or what a client has requested. So we're supporting them in developing a portfolio scale strategy around what green building certification programs they want to use, how they're going to how that then translates into financing and incentives in different markets, how it translates across these reputational arenas and what their customers are expecting. And then also helping them to then set those, guide those policies and strategies and standards that they need to develop to really deploy it across their entire portfolio. We're working with multiple publicly traded companies as well, helping them either assess climate change risk to their portfolio and calculate how much of the value of their portfolio is at risk based on different climate scenarios in different locations. And then, and also reporting to GRES, but the GRES platform. And then we're working with the Department of General Services for the Washington, D.C. Local government. They've got over 200 buildings, and we're helping them actually bring their own owned buildings up into compliance with the Washington, D.C. local building performance regulations. So they have a requirement that all buildings reduce their EUI by 20% by 2026. And so we're working with them to map that across their entire portfolio and figure out which buildings to prioritize first and how to, what strategies to implement. So, it kind of runs the gamut from dealing with, again, these kind of like local jurisdiction requirements that talk about disclosure and benchmarking and performance all the way up to the corporate level. And a lot of our clients have really ambitious targets. We've looked at, of our top 50 clients globally, 96% of them have really ambitious publicly stated sustainability goals. Roughly 88% of those goals are set to expire by 2025. They have a 2025 date on them, tied to them, and they don't really have anything after that. But even more concerning, I think, is this last stat, which is from the ones that we've surveyed, only 19% of them have an action plan in place with committed budget to actually help them get to their targets. So, we're seeing a lot of our clients, and even generally speaking, in kind of broad media, there's a kind of exponential growth of commitments and pledges and statements, and we yet are still seeing this kind of flat line at the implementation action scale. And so this is where, again, from JLL's perspective and how we're using this data, it's really about how it hits the sweet spot for us. We're really aiming to try to support those organizations who have these stated commitments to then develop this action plan, right? Let us help you put it into action, figure out what you actually need to do, help you prioritize it, help you plan for it, develop a roadmap of actually achieving these reductions. So this is our kind of process where we take organizations through from everything from helping them create a vision for the organization and benchmark and baseline their own performance against those areas that are material to them or that are important to those organizations, helping them set their goals, and then helping them develop a strategy that actually we can track over time to implement those goals. So I'm gonna end with a couple of questions and notes that we might pick up in terms of discussion. So the first is just this infinitely expanding and changing ESG related regulation landscape, everything from the SEC to the international ones, hundreds more around the globe, whether it's federal level or even kind of real estate specific at the building level and looking at energy benchmarking and disclosure. There's the kind of ESG debate around what's like single and double materiality, or another way to think about it is, are we evaluating risk to shareholders or are we looking at risk to stakeholders? Do we care what the effects of climate change are on the business, or do we care about what the business's effect is on climate change, right? And then the other is just this trend of increasing commitments and lagging actions. At the end of the day, what we're really advising all of our clients as an organization is, regardless of where any of those regulations go, regardless of what the debate is, regardless of what the trends are, regardless of whether ESG as a moniker sticks around for another 5 years, it's start now, right? Start collecting the data, start getting data management process in place, start making a plan, because regardless of where any of that goes, this is it's not only what needs to happen, but the writing is on the wall that the pressure is going to only increase. And so the sooner organizations get ahead of that and start getting prepared, the better prepared they will be when it does become a requirement. So I'm going to stop there.
Well, you guys, fascinating, and I just learned so much. We did get a couple questions, but I am going to go back to your slide there, Sean, because it is a good list of things to kind of poke holes at. One quick thing, and I think we want to get some terminology defined. Someone already asked what's a KPI, but we answered that offline. Can you, in 30 seconds, talk about what is the Science-Based Targets Initiative? Who is that? What is it?
Sure. So the Science-Based Target Initiative is a nonprofit that's actually, I'm not sure that they're nonprofit, but they're an organization that is focused on evaluating climate reduction targets and goals. And so the requirements to have a publicly stated goal that has been validated by the Science-Based Targets Initiative. They have an entire criteria and technical guidance documents that you have to follow in terms of how you calculate the carbon footprint, what you include in that carbon footprint, what scopes you include, what scopes you exclude, and the level of ambition of the reduction targets. And so the idea is that organizations develop their carbon reduction targets, and then Science-Based Targets as an organization validates those targets, whether they are in alignment with a 1.5 degree Paris Solutions trajectory or not. And so there's multiple pathways to set those targets, but organizations that have them, it means that they have had their carbon footprints and their carbon reduction targets validated to be in alignment with the best climate science that we know as of now.
Yeah, great. That's super valuable. It kind of segues into another question that pops up pretty frequently, and we've discussed it ourselves, which is, this prioritization of decarbonization, carbon footprinting. Do you guys, and I'd like both of you to answer, you already showed there are a lot of things, and Drew, you had the slide where you showed kind of the categories of things people should be looking at, circularity, materiality, some of the other things. Do you feel that there's too much focus on carbon to the detriment of other categories? What's your opinion on this question?
Yeah, I can go. I think we have a carbon tunnel vision for sure. But having said that, there is no, well, let me reframe that. That is the single most attribute that we are able to measure, right? And we know that contributes to climate change, and that we are lacking on in terms of measurement and reduction and eliminating. So if we can't get that one attribute under control, how are we going to control some of the other attributes that might be more pressing, but we haven't even started on that journey yet? So yes, we do have carbon tunnel vision, but we need to have at least one attribute under control or have visibility to where we are going with it before we can start addressing a whole other suite of attributes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because it's the whole idea behind the ESG acronym is that it's intended to not just be about carbon, right? Like it includes aspects of social impact, it includes aspects of governance, and yet when we look at kind of where client demand is, what investors are really pushing on, There was a study that I saw recently that is basically, if you look at there's different rating agencies out there, right? Standard and Poor, there's all kinds of other, there's the S&P, there's all these different kind of third-party organizations that have their own rating systems for saying, here's how we score this organization relative to ESG. Even organizations that don't get scored well on S and G factors, right? The only things that they really make changes on are the performance-related environmental ones. Those are the ones that we're able to see a correlation between, an organization used to get scored as a 80 on the S&P, sustainability ESG list, and this year they got scored at a 60. The following year, you can see that they put dedicated money towards improving their environmental performance, but they very rarely put any money towards improving governance or social impact, right? And so it's an interesting tension, I guess, that in theory, it's supposed to be evaluating a much more holistic look at how an organization is managing risk, how it contributes to risk across this spectrum of indicators, and yet, kind of from a sustainability perspective, we're still kind of in this myopic vision of like, well, carbon is the thing that we can calculate. It's the thing that we seem to feel like we need to solve kind of either first or somehow focus on it in isolation. I think, what I think from an opinion perspective, right? Like my opinion is that we need to try to solve all of these things at the same time, because otherwise then we just end up, right? And like, what's the point of preserving our climate if we are going to continue to preserve racism at the same time, right? We need to find ways to solve all of these issues at the same time, or what we're sustaining is just the status quo of an inequitable world that doesn't work for everybody. That includes, horrible systems that don't work. So, from a strategic perspective, I'm always trying to find ways that we can solve all of these problems together at the same time.
Well, with that, there's a very practical question that's been posed, looking at the near term. And the question is, are there any specific regulations that we can specifically prepare for now or highly anticipate for 2023, 2024? And what exactly can we start collecting data on now to be prepared?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it depends on kind of the sector and kind of what you're in, but at a minimum, I would say, if you're just, regardless of what scale you're at, the SEC regulations are for publicly traded companies. That pressure is going to start to trickle down. So the idea of collecting data now is finding ways to collect actual energy use across your physical footprint, actual water data, actual data around commuting, around your supply chain, around typically when we look at kind of the footprint of an organization and where the impact really comes, it's JLL's footprint is not uncommon, right? The amount of direct carbon emissions that are the result of JLL directly burning a fossil fuel is very little compared to the impact that happens in kind of the full value chain of the organization. And so starting to, at a bare minimum, it's getting the data for the stuff that you are directly responsible for. And once you have that in place, then the next question is, okay, well, now you need to start thinking about what are the places where, as an organization, you either spend the most money, in your value chain. What is the thing you spend the most money on? That's one indicator that it might be a place where you have an outsized impact in terms of carbon emissions as well, and other indicators.
I would like to add that outside of SEC regulation that we know is upcoming, if you are a private organization, private business, it is also going to be imperative for you to start measuring these KPIs that Sean was mentioning, because a lot of private equity firms and private investors are also seeking this information to understand the risk their portfolios pose. So even if you're a private business, you cannot shy away from collecting this data and being transparent about it.
So then that's a good answer to this other practical follow-on question, which is, are there any recommended programs or resources that can help a small company collect that footprint data?
Yeah, there's several tools out there. EPA has a really detailed guidance in terms of what to collect, how to collect, and how to calculate, more importantly, your greenhouse gas emissions. And so do other organizations, depending on what scope you're looking at. So yeah, there are tools that small businesses can use today to be compliant, for sure.
And that are free.
Correct. That's right.
Yeah, actually, in the follow-up email that you'll get in a day or two that contains this recording, I'll include the link to that government resource, and you can get all the documentation and the tools to do that yourselves. It kind of segues into this other question. Now that the SEC has stepped in to start regulating around carbon, this question came in, should we be anticipating other initiatives from other agencies in the near future?
Yeah, and I don't know, Dhruv, if you've got a better handle on the regulation side. The one thing that I know, or that I saw, was that the SEC is also, in addition to carbon, they're considering other requirements for disclosure around other metrics. So that's already kind of in the pipeline from the SEC's perspective of it not just being about greenhouse gas inventories and disclosure there.
Yeah, and that in itself is huge, right? Who wants to go to jail for disclosing or greenwashing to SEC, right? We could do that as a marketing claim, but I don't think we would be able to do any of that going forward. Just like we can't fudge our revenues, our profit and loss statement, we can't do that with carbon and any other material KPI that's material to our business any longer. So I think that's a big stick to comply with. If you're a global company, there's regulations around greenhouse gas emissions that are either in the works or have passed. EU is at the forefront of this, but every major country, if you're a global company you have operations in, has something that's coming down the pike, just like the SEC regulation. So it's really a business imperative, to recognize your risks and communicate very transparently about them.
Let me just do a quick time check. It is a little bit after 3. There are more questions, and still the lion's share of the attendees are still on. Dhruv and Sean, do you have a little bit more time?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, another quick, probably easier to answer question has just come in, which is embodied carbon of materials required to be reported in ESG reporting?
So yeah, from a real estate perspective, depending on what your role is in the process, they would show up in what would be called your scope 3 category of emissions. So this is kind of the cradle to gate stage. It could show up in any number of the kind of subcategories within there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just give you an example of one sector, chemicals industries, for example. Over 70% of their emissions are scope 3. or chemicals companies, right? So you can see the amount of data they need to collect before they even start taking actions in terms of reducing their impact. So absolutely, that is the most critical piece right now that is, that needs attention from a measurement and just transparency standpoint of, hey, I'm doing this, and is that doing anything to my goals that I'm signing up for?
Yeah, and so a lot of I mentioned this. We talked about the Science-Based Targets initiative. So the Science-Based Targets initiative has issued sector-specific guidance for what it means to create a 1.5 degree aligned carbon reduction goal, right? And they are working on a sector-specific guidance document for the built environment currently, and so that's set to be released specific to buildings. One of the pieces that's important to note here is in any of the kind of from the carbon accounting side of things, all of that scope 3 work is built around estimates, models, and kind of best data that's available, right? So part of this question of are we able to measure and show progress over time, and what's the first step, and what should we be start measuring as a starting place? A lot of these kind of inventories are created using a best estimate broad brush, and over time data collection improves and you're able to then start to show reductions, right? Because you're able to have a data collection methodology. And so specific to an embodied carbon aspect, I mean, I think that's where the kind of the building scale, product manufacturing scale is like colliding with the global organizational scale carbon accounting stuff, because we're starting to see that if you're gonna include that as part of the emissions of an organization, an architect, a contractor, a developer, et cetera, those emissions, if you can't actually measure, if you can't have data that allows you to measure actual embodied carbon, then there's no way to demonstrate a reduction over that, because you're going to always be using the same industry best benchmarks, CBEX data as an equivalent example, right? Or Carbon Leadership Forum baseline for X sum category, right? If we always assume that category always has that average baseline of embodied carbon, we can never, as an organization or as an industry, start to show reductions over time. And so that's part of why it's so important for us to start to get real data in here, because then we can actually track and show real reductions relative to even the industry average.
Yep, good answer. I think
also I just want to make a quick point, the relevance aspect of it, right, around carbon. So yes, that's not the only KPI, but when we do EPDs, they languish for 5 years, right? And either we are making all the changes and they don't get across, or we are not doing anything till it's year 4. So, the technology piece today helps us, if we really want to be transparent, do a live, product carbon footprint. So anytime you make a change, automatically your LCAs, DCFs are updated. You don't have to wait for 5 years. So that's another aspect of leadership. And you can pick any KPI in that ESG map of yours, that's specific to your sector. You can do that today. So there's no more reason we have a 3-year goal and I'll wait until year 2.5 to figure out if I get there or not. You can see and be transparent on a daily basis.
Dhruv, you spoke about tools, and you did speak about, and just again, more rapidly updating LCAs at scale. Are there tool suggestions you might share for those building product manufacturers on the call who are looking to do similar work?
Yeah, talk to Accenture, right? No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, there's absolutely, there's so many platforms out there. I mean, I am platform agnostic, but I can give you examples. AWS, has their carbon calculator tool. Salesforce has a net zero tool. And what am I missing? Microsoft has something, carbon calculator. Then there are, a couple of tools. SAP has, right? So a lot of the businesses have SAP ERP systems. They have a product footprint calculator that helps you do all of this, as well as newer technologies such as Palantir also have tremendous capability in terms of what you can do in terms of scale and speed in a matter of weeks and months.
And then how do those tools feed into an LCA tool, for example?
Those tools are the LCA tools. Yeah. So because it's a data problem, right? We always have the allocation problem with LCAs. If you have an SAP ERP system, and this is not a plug for SAP, you can use any ERP system that you have. You can create data lakes that are structured in a way that allocate commodities, based on how products are made with BOM and recipe and all of that data. And all these platforms that I mentioned, and they all have pros and cons associated, like there's no one silver bullet right now, but all these platforms, if you use, will pull data from the data lake that's structured in that manner and calculate, your product carbon footprint in a matter of milliseconds, of course, and give you that data. And once you made that connection, it stays good. So anytime you change your procurement at a plant level or anywhere else, the PCF keeps changing and evolving as you bring in different type of feedstock or whatever levers you may be pulling. So it's very dynamic.
That's exciting. Let's have that lead into a last green building type of question. And by the way, for those of you who are still here, thank you. This is a really important topic, and it's great to get time from both of these guys. When you leave, there is a quick survey, and if you want follow-up from them, you can leave your name and ask for that, or leave any other questions or comments, and we will try to get your questions answered. So this question has to do with LEED, and it goes like this, that LEED is relatively easy for projects to reach, and you can have an EUI that doesn't reach low levels or really address embodied carbon. So is LEED being used as a realistic compliance path, or is it only one tool? And I know that LEED is working on some new carbon guidance. So what's your take on LEED? How is it being used currently? What's the prognosis going forward? And anything you know about what they're working on that dovetails with this topic would be helpful.
I think the only thing that I would, from my perspective, I would say, LEED is, I would characterize it as one of the tools. It as a transparency certification program, it fits into the context of whether or not an organization is disclosing things. I mean, with the exception of science-based targets and ILFI certifications and other, the greenhouse gas protocol, for example, doesn't dictate, what level of emissions are appropriate or not, right? So just because you've followed that protocol doesn't mean that you've, that you are taking a leadership stance, right? GRESB looks at the percentage of your real estate holdings that are certified, green building certified, right? I mean, it's LEED, it's Energy Star, Living Building Challenge, Zero Carbon, et cetera. So there, it's kind of one data point in this matrix. LEED definitely has a huge market share in terms of green building certification. And it's definitely referenced in a lot of kind of local jurisdictions as a proxy for what it means to build sustainably. So and in terms of where LEED is going and what the current development is, I'm not as plugged in on it, so I wouldn't be able to speak to that part.
Okay, Dhruv, any final thoughts on this question?
I don't have great insights, but what I do want to mention is that it's all about transparency, right? We talk that a lot in building products and just the built environment industry. And LEAP provides us with a framework, right? But we are often caught unaware in terms of, hey, my product got substituted or it didn't get built as we specified. So there's a lack of transparency there, right? And I think any solution that solves that problem, and Sustainable Minds is one for sure, in terms of making it very clear in terms of what you are getting into and how is that impacting your design decisions, is helpful. But we need that kind of measurement capability and analytics and transparency throughout the life cycle of how you build, operate, and maintain those buildings.
Well, there are a pile more questions. I think people are beginning to probably hit their time mark. So want to thank everybody for attending today. We will continue to do more webinars around the ESG topic and related topics as we move into 2023 and beyond. I think it really is becoming top of mind. What was once just sustainability reporting is now really key to businesses and financial implications, political implications. There's so much more to really uncover and try to forecast about where things are going to go and how it affects businesses today. So we will do more. I like doing these webinars because I get to ask my questions that I want to learn about. So I get to be a proxy for the audience. And I'd like to thank, again, all of you for coming. Dhruv and Sean, thank you so much. You guys are really leading the way, and thank you for sharing your knowledge and insights. And hope everyone has a great day and a great holiday weekend.